So in this lesson, we're going to look at the ability to administer OneDrive for Business across the organization. Now, we can do the same thing with SharePoint, but we also now have the ability to do that for OneDrive for Business. Now, the way that we need to do that is we'll need to be an administrator with the appropriate rights. When we have those rights, we'll see an additional icon here on our login to the web portal called admin. If we select that, we're then taken to the admin console. Now, there are a couple of options in here that we can use to administer OneDrive. So the most logical one down here is under the admin consoles. You'll see that we have an option here for OneDrive. But before we get into that, let's just go in and have a look at the options that are available in our active users. So if I pick a user here that is currently on the system in Office 365 and we scroll down the bottom, you see that we have the options here to manage their OneDrive settings. Now, what this allows us to do is to go in as an administrator and control things like access, the quota, the external sharing, the sign out, and other settings here as well. So if you want access to a user's OneDrive, you can simply come into the properties of that user and you'll see that we can select the option here to access their files. We can also look at the quota, how much space they are using, and turn on or off their ability to do external sharing. And again, we can force a sign out of that syncing environment if we want. So the first place to start when administrating our OneDrive for Business for our users across the organization is inside the actual properties for that user. Now, as I said, the main administration section is down here under the admin centers. You'll see one here called OneDrive. Now, this will take us to the OneDrive admin portal. You'll notice that the URL is also admin.onedrive.com. Now, in here we control the global settings across our organization. So, for example, we can control the sharing, all right, and we can also control things like the external sharing in SharePoint and OneDrive. We've also got the advanced options here that we can control. If we look at the sync option, you'll see here that we can prevent, for example, the sync button being displayed on the OneDrive sites. We can force the ability to only allow PCs joined to specific domains to be able to sync. We can also block specific file types. So let's say you don't want an MP3 or maybe an MP4 being synced, well then you can block that globally from here. If we go into the storage, you'll see that we can control the default storage. Now remember that the default storage varies with the plan that you have. So the enterprise plans have unlimited OneDrive storage, all right, so they can be scaled up as required, whereas basically the business plans do have a limit. All right, so we can go in here and we might want to say, for example, look, I only want to start with giving my users maybe 250 gig rather than a terabyte. You go in and make those changes. All right, so again, we've also got this ability here to determine how long the files in our OneDrive are maintained once a user has been deleted. So by default, we'll get 30 days to access the information before that is cleaned up and removed. We can also control the access via devices. So we can restrict devices connecting globally to our tenant via IP address. Again, we can make sure they have modern authentication, and we can also deploy and use the mobile application management to do things like encrypt data and require an app password if we want. And again, when a device is offline, we can determine how long the data is kept on there. We've also got the compliance option. So remember that if you have typically the enterprise SKUs, the E3, the E5, you're going to have the ability to do things like data loss prevention and retention policies, e-discovery, and alerts and so on. So we can set those either in the Compliance Center, but we can also do that here from our OneDrive admin console. The final option we've got here across our tenant is to display notifications. All right, so this will display notifications to the OneDrive owners when we get things like invitations and external users accept those invitations, and we have access on an anonymous link. So remember that the way that we got to our OneDrive area is we went into the admin icon here when we had the appropriate rights. We found under admin centers, we found the OneDrive option, and that gave us access to a number of different settings over here on the left hand side. And finally, remember that to get access to an individual user's OneDrive environment, you can go into the properties for that user, scroll down until you find the OneDrive settings, expand that, and you'll see that you have a number of settings here. And typically the one that most people want is to get access to a user's OneDrive files. Now remember that by default, generally a user's OneDrive files is restricted just to their access, so it's private like their inbox, but as an administrator you can go in and make that change and gain access if you need to. So there are some basics around doing the administration globally across the tenant for OneDrive for Business.